Times like these are tough for all of us, and sticking together is more important than ever. One of the ways we can do that is supporting local businesses. So let's take a second to talk about one of Okie Shosho's favorite small businesses, Squishy OKC. Squishy provides custom apparel and graphic design work. T-shirts, hoodies, hats, you name it. Their custom artwork is super fun and totes adorbs. Here's an impression of me seeing Squishy OKC stuff for the first time. Oh my gosh, look how cute it is! If this is something you're interested in, follow at Squishy OKC on Instagram. Squishy OKC!
Hello and welcome to the podcast that explores the Heartland's entertainment industry on a COVID special. This is kind of a mini episode as kind of an addendum to our conversation with Mr. Ed Skoch on our last episode. We were talking about production insurance for films, kind of in general. Well, since we talked to Ed last, Ed, I think we talked back in February?
Yes.
And since February, the world exploded. And now here we are in a post-COVID world where we're having to do temperature checks on set every day. There's all sorts of different things that have changed. I have shaved my beard down to a glorious porn mustache to accommodate wearing a mask all day because it gets super hot. Tell you what, wearing a mask for 12 hours for 5 days a week sucks.
I believe it. So put in perspective, downstairs when we recorded that was Amy Klobuchar at the theater.
That's right.
She was on a campaign tour.
Oh
That's how long ago it was.
Wow. And it's crazy how within that matter of time, the world has changed pretty substantially, I would say. I was talking to my brother about how the whole pandemic situation in a way has kind of dwarfed the 9/11 event as far as scope and scale. There's just massive changes happening all around just in the way that we do things, especially in the world of film. I've been on a film set now for 5 days. The first feature that I've gotten to work on in over 3 months. And I mean, wow, it's a world of difference. To kind of give the audience an idea of what film sets are looking like at this point, and we're still kind of getting in the feel of things. We're still feeling out procedures and all that. We are wearing masks for the entirety of the day, unless you step off set and then you can get a breath of fresh air. We are now eating lunches out of food trucks only, having custom boxes handed to us as opposed to we used to have kind of a buffet style. So the communal eating is now gone. I basically end up eating my lunch in my car every day so that I can socially distance. When we are on set, we try to social distance as much as possible. So there's all these new convoluted ways that in some ways complicate the process of filmmaking. In other ways, they really don't. I'm actually surprised that life on set is as easy as it is. But I wanted to talk to Ed to kind of catch us up before we specifically talk about the adaptation to COVID. Let's take a step back and just recap where we were as far as production insurance goes right before this whole thing started. So right before, if I was going to have a production, I would come to Ed and I would say, I need some production insurance for my movie. And that process would involve what?
So presumably you have the information we would need in order to find a quote. So a smaller budget film, let's say below $1 million in budget, it's super straightforward. You need to tell me whether or not you're going to have stunts. And I think we talked pretty extensively about stunts last time.
Yeah, we did.
Animals are stunts.
Cats are
the
stunts.
Automobile, all this kind of stuff. So you need to have that in mind. You need to have your dates pretty well set. They can change, but pretty well set. You're going to need to have a synopsis. You don't necessarily have to have the full script for a small film. Just a synopsis will do for most of your small budget films. You need to know what equipment you want covered that you own, so owned equipment. You need to know how much equipment you're going to rent, roughly. You can usually add that in the future. So if you come to me with saying, yeah, we're going to rent $50,000 worth of equipment, okay, we can get you a quote on that. If you need to double it or triple it or quadruple it, we can do that during the policy shoot. You can't do it afterwards, but that should be self-evident, right?
Right. By the way, I had several thousands more dollars worth of equipment.
Yeah, that's exactly the disappearing Rolex.
Yeah, yeah.
List, right? You have to have the LLC set up. We talked about that last time. If you're going to do it that way, you've got to determine what coverages you want. Do you want a policy for liability? Do you want a policy for the equipment that I just mentioned? Do you want a workers' compensation? Do you want automobiles covered that you rent? So you just have to have an idea of all those things. But that literally the amount of information there that we're talking about is, a couple pages of an application.
Right.
It's really easy. For the small films, super easy. We can often bind the same day, get you the policy in hand. As long as you get us the information, we can roll it out.
Yeah.
If you just need liability, let's say you're just going to do person with a camera on the corner tomorrow 6 a.m., 5:30 in the morning. Don't call me. You can actually go to our website and you can buy coverage by the hour for that.
Oh, wow.
So that's the super straightforward, general liability only. You can get that. You should also know who you need to get certificates of insurance for. We talked about that before.
Yeah.
So line up the names, full addresses, and who they are. Is it a location? Is it a rental company, et cetera, et cetera? Is it a city government entity? All those things, just line them up ahead of time. And on the small budget films, very quick. The larger films, let's say, for example, everything above $1 million in budget, you're going to have your days out of days. You're going to have the full script. In order to get cast coverage, you're going to need the names of the cast and some resumes for them. For any size film, you should have ready a description of any of the stunts, how many scenes, how many actors, details about it, and a stunt coordinator should have that ready. Definitely for the bigger ones, because they're going to scrutinize the resume or the bio at least of the stunt person.
I feel like they should be doing that on the small sets too.
Yeah, they don't always ask, but
Yeah.
To have it ready is super helpful. And if you lead with it, look, we've got a stunt coordinator, boom, you're more likely to get the coverage, and it might even be cheaper. So that's about it in a nutshell.
Yeah. And so now we have the COVID situation happen. And we touched a little bit on, I love the term, the force majeure. It's so fancy sounding, kind of epic sounding. Ed, remind the audience what exactly a force majeure is.
So what I tried to point out last time, maybe inartfully, we didn't actually use the words force majeure, but the idea is that there's something unforeseen. Act of God is what we had said last time. Something that prevents you from, it's really a term of contract between two parties. It's something that prevents you from from finishing the contract. So you and I contract to, construct a building, and it turns out that, my suppliers of this particular glass that you wanted in your building, they were wiped out in a hurricane or whatever, and I cannot get that glass anymore. It's that kind of a thing. It's something that breaks the possibility of completing the contract as it was written, and it was something that the parties did not contemplate. So it's really just limited to contracts between parties. Now, insurance is a contract between you and your insurance company, but there's really no such thing in the policy per se that covers acts of God or force majeure, except, you're going to say, isn't a hailstorm or a windstorm or a fire an act of God? Yeah, but those things are listed in the policy.
They're somewhat predictable.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a cause of loss in the policy. Right. It doesn't say, it says fire,
yeah,
vandalism, riot, windstorm, hail, and those are listed as causes of loss in the policy. It doesn't say, and any other act of God that you can think of. It is usually a specific reason for the loss. Yeah. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. So if you're shooting in Oklahoma and a meteor comes and destroys the entire set, that would be considered force majeure. We didn't see that one coming.
Would we get coverage for that? I'm going to have to take a pass on that.
Yeah.
Answering that.
Right. Zombie apocalypse.
Good question. And you know what I would say is, read the policy.
Right. And this is where having your attorney comes in hand.
Now,
am I calling that right?
Yes.
You're going to turn me into an insurance expert by the end of this, Ed.
I hope so. And then you're going to proselytize for me all over. So here's the thing about COVID. It was, in fact, more foreseen by the insurance industry because we had SARS. So there are a lot of policies out there that had virus exclusions on them because it was contemplated by the insurance carriers, back in 2003. So those exclusions started to appear. Every policy is different, but for the most part, there's not that flexibility in most policies. And look, where are you going to get it? Pull it back to film. The whole idea of force majeure or act of God or whatever preventing the film finishing, it really has to do with the extra expense, which is a specific coverage under film policies. It's like business interruption coverage under a property policy for a business. But it's got very specific triggers, as we'd say in the insurance industry.
Yeah.
For that coverage to apply. And usually it's physical damage. So yeah, the meteor hits the building that you're filming in. That would be physical destruction of the building. Yeah, sure, it's an act of God, but it's actually a covered thing under the policy.
Yeah, okay.
So it's not the meteor that's causing the coverage. It's the destruction of the building that you're shooting in. You're shooting in the theater downstairs from your studio there, and that is wiped out by a meteor. It's not like you'd read the policy and say, "Oh, meteor, I don't see meteor coverage in here." It's the building was wiped out.
The building, yeah.
We can't go into the building. There was physical destruction of that property.
Right.
So that's really what the trigger of that coverage is for that extra expense. Now we have to go out, we have to look for another theater that's got the same characteristics to finish the shoot.
Interesting.
That's extra expense coverage in a nutshell.
So then how do you tackle a situation like this pandemic where not only do we have the pandemic, but then you had the government locking everything down and shutting productions down due to states. I was in the middle of a movie. We had 5 days left when we got shut down because of the Oklahoma state of emergency that was declared. So where does insurance come into all of that?
Yeah, who knows? Maybe it was one that we were working on, It happened. It did happen for sure. It's a very policy specific thing. Some of the carriers actually had, specific virus exclusions that dealt with that. Some did not. But for the most part, unless there was some physical damage, there wasn't much room there. It's a virus. It's one thing to have to clean up a location. So let's say, perhaps you could see an idea where, having to scrub down from a virus might be something that physically impacted the location where you were shooting. But that's a pretty narrow, we're talking about pretty narrow situations there, right?
Right. Yeah.
Now there are other small coverages, once again, totally policy dependent. There's some with civil authority coverage under some policies. There's imminent peril policies. I'm using air quotes here that you can't see. But all of those are pretty limited, and it's, preventing access to the premises because of civil authority saying you can't go into the premises, but once again, usually requiring some kind of physical damage someplace else.
Right. So then a production just being shut down by the government, is that covered under insurance, or is that just based on the policies that you get?
Based on the policy. It's going to be a policy by policy determination.
Right.
That's the rule of determining coverage. It's always, you take the facts as presented, not hypotheticals, but facts as presented, compared to the policy language, and make a determination of coverage. So you could have the exact same fact scenario, two different policies, and end up with different results.
Wow. So for the productions that got shut down, that say that they didn't have the type of policy that would cover the COVID situation that we had, what happens to those productions?
Well, the thing is, we should remember that unless it's a really small budget thing, which wouldn't have those coverages anyway, like that extra expense, they probably doesn't have those coverages anyway.
Right.
So if you're buying your 60-day, 30-day, 1-day policy, you're just going to buy another policy probably. Once you get up and ready to shoot again.
Right.
It was
this
cheap.
time.
Yeah, it was relatively cheap, relatively inexpensive. I know it seems like a lot of money for the size of the budget, some of the budgets out there, but it is relatively cheap coverage overall.
Well, and now, as we know, you just never know. Like, who could have possibly predicted the whole world shutting down?
True. Now, on the bigger films, most of those policies are written on an annual basis anyway. They're for a specific project, but kind of by default, they're written on a year basis. Okay. So you can come back, the clock is ticking, obviously, because you can come back and shoot generally. Right. You go back to the underwriters, you say, look, we're going to go back and shoot. Here's the new schedule. Here's what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
So it's not over.
Right. There's still you're still going to gear back up and finish production.
You can, hopefully. I really hope that these films get back up and are able to get the talent back out there. Obviously there's people working really hard in this state everywhere to try to get these back up, and they're really trying. Yeah. Well, and I hope the best for everybody.
Right. And for the listeners, we're going to be in the upcoming weeks, we're really going to start focusing a lot more on all of these changes. We're going to try to have a conversation with SAG and the local 484 IATSE union, because everybody is still figuring all this out. Yeah. Oklahoma is a right to work state. So, productions are able to move forward without having necessarily the official support of SAG or IATSE. But that's why we're trying to arm you all with the knowledge so that you can at least move forward in your work, feeling prepared, so that if you do see red flags, you're going to recognize them as red flags. So for a production that's gearing up right now, now we are in a post-COVID world. There's a lot of productions that were having a hard time getting back up and running because of the fact that they could not get the production insurance. So therefore, all the rental houses, they couldn't get their COIs, all the crew, they couldn't get their COIs. So it all kind of trickles downhill. So for a production that's trying to get into gear now, how does that process work, accommodating for COVID?
So, we were able to get quotes all through this. So, it was available. The difference now is that some of the carriers have pulled back. This is, once again, that's moving target. So we're speaking now on the 1st of June. And
Right.
as of, today or whatever, there are a couple carriers that have picked up their pencils and are not writing new business. But there are others that are actively quoting in this space, actively binding policies. So it did not stop. The production stopped, but the insurance did not completely stop.
Okay.
What is different now is there's not much. The premiums have come up. I would say anywhere from 20-50%. That's, just a super, super, super rough,
Yeah.
idea. And
Well,
there
and that
are
makes sense
carriers,
because the production costs in general have also gone up because of all the new kind of security protocols that we have in place. It just takes more time, and it's there's just more people that you need and more resources that you need to be able to get the job done.
yeah. And for larger films, there's one other or two other related very big changes. Basically, no one is doing essential cast coverage right now.
And what does that mean, essential cast coverage?
So I think we talked about this kind of offline last time. And so if you do a production where you have a star that you're putting in, you're doing a rom-com and you're using a star in your rom-com, cast cover will pay extra if that star is injured, sick, dies, and you need to replace that star.
Oh, wow.
Essential cast coverage is basically, I'm speaking in broad terms here. Somebody could find fault with what I'm saying, but in broad brush strokes, essential cast coverage is when the star is irreplaceable. This is an Eddie Murphy movie, and we've got Eddie Murphy, and Eddie Murphy breaks his leg, and we can't shoot, or worse,
Right.
So essential cast, that person is indispensable, and cast cover means it's going to take some time to replace like for like. But if it's a rom-com, you've got a host of people that could basically fill a rom-com role just fine if you swap out the star. It might not have the same star pull, but you're still going to bring an A-lister or a B-lister into that role. But it's going to take you some time to recruit them. That's cast coverage.
Okay.
Essential cast coverage means that essential cast member.
Right. And so that's one of the elements that's changed kind of in a post-COVID world?
Yeah, so we can get cast coverage. It used to be easier to get. Now it's hard to get, very hard to get.
Yeah. And why is it so hard to get?
I think that the world has changed so much when it comes to risks that people weren't expecting, that there's just a lot of worry on the part of the industry. This is where we're sticking our neck out the most, perhaps.
Right.
So we can't, it's harder to quantify this risk. So they get sheepish about it and pull back.
Yeah. Cause that's been kind of the situation. I know, because SAG is still kind of finalizing their new stuff. So I've been hearing from other productions that's kind of been the case of like working it out with SAG and then not being able to work it out with SAG. And so they end up having to go with a non-SAG actor, or make have the SAG actor sign the agreement that they're not going to be union for that particular film.
Okay. Yeah. And that stuff is not going to play into the insurance. That's not going to matter.
Okay.
But the essential, you want to do an Eddie Murphy film, you're probably not going to get, I don't know anybody that's going to give you coverage for Eddie Murphy for an Eddie Murphy film.
Really?
If you got a comedy, and you can replace the stars, then you can probably get cast cover for the cost of replacing the stars. But not the named individual. You're not going to be able to get that person covered.
Right. Wow. That's interesting. Well, yeah,
And
because I guess you
we've been
can
doing
replace
this.
Eddie Murphy with a clone Eddie Murphy.
Right. There is no replacement for Eddie Murphy.
Right. There was only one Eddie Murphy.
Can you tell I like Eddie Murphy? But
I do too.
but take the rom-com thing. You might have, I don't know, pick somebody. Who's a hot actor now?
Chris Pratt.
Chris Pratt. Yes, you replace him with another one of the Chris's, right? Isn't that how they're the Chris's?
Yeah. You just replace him with Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah. So it might take you some time to get one of the other Chris's to come in, and that downtime, that would be, cast coverage that's what it's designed to do. Take up that cost of winding down in order to get somebody else in that fits that billing.
Right.
Different from essential cast coverage. So cast coverage, we can get it. Essential cast coverage, we can't get it. Nobody can.
Nobody can get essential cast.
Nobody can get it.
Wow. Is there
Call the show if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And scream at Brian. But but no, seriously, that just has been a complete no-no. And getting the cast coverage has been more difficult out in the COVID world.
Right.
Whereas we used to be able to get perhaps, the 10 top cast members kind of, just give me the list.
Yeah.
We'll insure them. Now it is one by one, individually underwritten.
Wow. So does that mean that you have to buy an individual policy for each?
No.
Oh, okay.
They get endorsed.
I see.
They're approved, they're endorsed. Just like with stunts, you endorse it onto the policy. We're covering this stunt.
I gotcha.
So that is the big change.
Wow. Yeah, because that's the one thing that I'm very curious about the movie that I was working on that got shut down. Our number one, our lead actress, she's in her 70s, so she's extremely high risk, and I'm very curious as to how they're going to go about finishing out that project. We only had 5 days left, and how are we going to do that?
You in a dress with that CG technology to age you, not de-aging, but aging.
They'll do a deep fake for the whole rest of the movie.
I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that.
Wow. So are there any other changes beyond the cast coverage to gaining production insurance?
Not really. The pricing. You have to be aware of the pricing.
Premiums have gone up.
Premiums have gone up, not across the board, but in general, you got to be prepared for it. Mm-hmm. Some carriers are still sitting on the fence. Some are actively quoting. But once again, we're talking about, half a dozen carriers that ever did this stuff.
Right.
So
wow.
When you start having one or two sitting it out or three sitting it out, it does make a difference.
Wow. That's
now,
crazy.
On the small films, it's always been the same couple of players and that's it. And they've been quoting nonstop. It just hasn't made a difference.
So technically, even in the midst of the COVID pandemic and quarantine and all that, if somebody wanted to shoot their short film or their super low budget film, they could have.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
You want to shoot it?
Just not wisely.
We have one going up. I mean, it was a piece of cake. It's tomorrow. It's on Zoom. So everybody's, everybody's isolated. Everybody's calling from their bunker.
Huh.
So
that's really interesting. That kind of explains how they were able to do, like, during the quarantine, you were not seeing new single cam content being created, obviously, because productions weren't able to make it happen. But you did see stuff like the Parks and Rec special where they were doing basically Zoom, and the SNL episodes where they were doing, stuff in their own individual apartments and in homes and stuff. So that's interesting. That makes sense. So that kind of stuff would have been able to get covered.
I can't tell you why people weren't doing it, other than maybe the unions, obviously, we were told that some of the stoppages were just due to the studio saying you will stop.
Right.
So we had that, but if you wanted to shoot something, with two people, a married couple or something, living in the same house together 2 months ago, I think it was the general shock, almost like you said, the 9/11 type of shock, that people just weren't doing it.
Right.
I maybe you could tell me better than I know.
No, I think
It's
you're
just
absolutely
stopped.
right. Like everybody, this was totally new ground for all of us. Like within Okie Show, we've been discussing where we move forward with shooting sketches and stuff. And so we have been writing Zoom content with the intention of creating it via Zoom for that very reason, just because this is all new ground. Like we don't really, we're still trying to figure it all out. And I'm sure we will. Obviously, we will. The whole industry is going to figure it out, but it's just going to take time. So, but it's interesting because in the meantime, people are still looking for content.
And look, it might have been that combination of shock. It might have been obviously for the bigger films. Sorry, we know why those were stopped. But on the smaller ones. I don't see a reason why they stopped other than that, the shock to the system, maybe funding, we had, there was hoarding. We have to remember that.
Yeah, that's true.
You couldn't buy toilet paper a couple months ago.
That's why you get a bidet.
That's right. So I'll build my own bidet, but I'm not funding your film.
Right. Bidets have been selling like hotcakes. So what can we see in the future as far as production insurance goes? Like, what do you take out your crystal ball and, prophesy for us what we're going to see in the future as far as production insurance goes after this pandemic? If we ever find a, whatever it's called, an antidote, using my action movie terminology.
I think these, provided the carriers that used to do film don't take it on the chin in other lines of business because of COVID. Like, let's say they did a lot of event cancellation. I guess you'd have to look at their balance sheets to determine that, is XYZ insurance company, international insurance company, did they do a ton of events cancellation like Wimbledon and then pay out an enormous loss on that because it was canceled because of COVID? Once they right themselves, they're going to be back writing this stuff. If that's not the case, if they didn't, they just don't kind of pull out of this entirely, they're going to be back writing this just simply with COVID exclusions and pandemic exclusions. And it will be just like it always was. Right. I don't think the prices will go back down again. To the extent that they wrote other lines of business that might get hit, people are saying directors and officers insurance. There's a whole host of other coverages in addition to the event cancellation that might be impacted by this in terms of claims. Once they finish licking their wounds, to be supportive of the insurance industry, look, we need them to be financially solvent. It is not a bad thing for insurance companies to make a profit on underwriting because that means they're going to stay around. If they don't, they don't. Yeah. Just like with restaurants, we want the restaurant to make profit. Right. So once they get back to that, they have been making profits over the past couple of years. So I think generally the industry, will weather this. There's a lot of money in it, and they'll be back writing it just like always.
Well, and
with those exclusions.
And it's just kind of a reiteration of the point that you need to get insurance for your project, for your own safety and for the safety of your crew and your crew's equipment and all that kind of stuff. And honestly, if you weren't getting, a policy that would cover an outbreak on your set before, you should have been, because if there's one thing that I've learned about working on a set, is that previously was an absolute hotbed for any kind of sickness. Like if one person got the flu, everybody got the flu. If one person got a cold, everybody got a cold. I don't know. I'm sure, I hope, I pray to God that changes with the new security policies that we have in place with people wearing masks and social distancing. I don't know how long the social distancing is really going to be able to last just because of the mechanisms of how filmmaking works. But, you know, having an on-set medic that is trained, that is not just your cousin that didn't have anything to do that day, is super, super important for the safety of your crew and your cast. And so, just take care of your crew. just take care of your people. Like, it's just so darn important.
And it might be down the road that, go on.
I was just going to say, like, we want to be able to tell stories. We want to be able to pursue our dreams, but we want to do it safely. And we want to be able to get back home to our families and provide for them and not feel like we are compromising ourselves or them.
Hear, hear.
So I'm excited for the future with all of this. I'm excited to see how everything adapts. And, you know, I think there's something to be said. It's not every day that you get to witness an entire industry change. So, you know, to the audience, to the listeners that are intimidated by all this, don't be. Think of it as a challenge to overcome. I think that because you can't change it, you just have to overcome it, and you have to, you know, you have to adapt, and you have to use your creative skills to figure it out. So on that note, I wanted to touch a little bit on, we were talking off air about a couple of things that we didn't get to touch on during our main episode. And I wanted to really, I just want to cover the bases because this is such an interesting topic to me. And for me personally, I just feel like it's super, super important. And if we want to get productions up and running again, you know, this is a really big deal. So let's kind of touch on some stuff that we didn't get to touch on last time. First being, we are talking about volunteers and how they are included in the insurance coverage. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of the things that I kind of maybe glossed over last time was that on the smaller films, we generally have people saying, oh, you know, I want to get insurance because I need to cover my volunteers. And they think they need to get general liability policies to cover their volunteers. But remember what I said last time. I listed the kind of four basic types of insurance. Let's repeat them right here. Workers' compensation, general liability, equipment coverage, and then maybe the E&O. For general liability, that's meant to cover you, your firm, against claims for bodily injury or property damage from third parties. Volunteers, employees are not third parties. Full stop. So
interesting.
you cannot get a general liability policy to cover in the event that your volunteers are injured. That's what you're buying workers' compensation for, basically.
So then workers' compensation will cover the volunteers. General liability will not.
True on the true with some caveats on the first, definitely true on the second.
Okay.
Because basically they're not considered, volunteers are working for you. You know, so they're considered like they're an insured. So if you're a volunteer, think of it this way.
They have their own individual insurance, is what you're saying. Am I reading you right?
No.
Oh, okay.
So you get your equipment carried out of the van down the street, and the volunteer drops the mic boom through the glass window, and the person comes out there waving their fist. They're going to be covered under your policy, your general liability policy, because they were doing this for you.
Okay.
That guy waving his fist is the third party. That's his window. The volunteer was carrying your kit down the street, caused an injury to a third party. That's general liability.
Okay.
So they're in the zone of trust.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's why injuries to them are not covered under the general liability policy.
Okay.
Just philosophically and by the exclusions on it.
So that's something for filmmakers that use volunteers to consider whenever they rely on volunteer workers, is that there might be a what's the word that I'm thinking of? There might be a am I thinking compromise?
Okay.
Help me out here, Ed.
Compromise? How about this
Yeah.
one? Buy workers' compensation insurance.
Boom. There you go.
Done.
There's the pitch.
I mean, that's the thing. So that's kind of an important hook.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. What else did we not touch on that you think would be really important to talk about before we?
I really wanted to get a little bit more deep into the property coverage. So I called it equipment coverage last time. It is really property insurance. It's really covering the property of the filmmaker or the filmmaking entity. So when we say property insurance, as opposed to liability insurance, we're talking about property of the filmmaker. Okay.
Gotcha.
It is often called inland marine coverage, like land, marine cover on land, inland marine.
Interesting.
Think cargo.
Okay.
It is equipment that's carried around. It's not equipment that stays in the office. It's equipment that moves location to location to location to location.
Right. So this stationary mic would not be what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the boom mic that I take on set.
Precisely.
Boom.
So if you bought your business insurance, bought some business insurance and it covered, this is why you cannot, as a filmmaker, don't buy a regular business owner's policy, because it's not going to cover, in general, it's not going to cover your equipment carried onto the set.
Right. So a business policy is just going to cover what's within your brick and mortar. Is that right?
Think furniture.
Gotcha.
Think desktop PC. Think boom mic attached to the desk.
Yeah.
That's what those business policies are meant to cover. That kind of equipment. Yes, it's business equipment. Yes, it's property, but it's not movable property. So that's why you really need to get a film kind of specific policy for inland marine insurance. And what happens is if you buy that regular policy, you go, decide that you're going to shop around and go on the internet and buy yourself a really cheap policy. Well, it probably only covers that property within 100 feet of the business address, or 1,000 feet, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's going to be some limit in feet. It'll say right on the policy, it'll say on premises or within 100 feet.
Yeah.
And if you carry anything carried beyond that, we're going to drop the limits to $2,000.
Gotcha.
So you buy this policy, you go, I got $100,000 of equipment coverage for cheap. I got it online. So proud of myself. Look at the wording, because the moment it leaves the property, leaves your office, essentially, now you get $2,500 coverage. That red camera that you have stolen,
man,
get your check for $2,500 and you'll be licking the wounds.
Wow,
sometime.
Man. So
that's why you need film specific insurance. You need to make sure that you're getting the right coverage. This is why. What did I say before at the beginning when we got on the phone together tonight? I said, don't want to be shopping for just the cheapest insurance. The market is super limited for actual film insurance. Find a broker that you like. We're all going to go to the same carriers. Nobody's going to get a better deal than any other party.
Right.
You're not going
to be dealing with an insurance broker that's going to try to highball you or something like that. It's just going to be the same across the board. Yeah.
No, not if they're ethical. I mean, you're probably not going to want to go to the guy that you buy homeowners from, because he's not going to know where to go for film insurance. He's not going to know where to go for inland marine coverage. You really should go to somebody that knows what they're doing. The policies are everything. The wording on the policies is everything.
Man, that's a great word.
Soapbox.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it's like, this is important stuff. And, we want to arm our filmmakers with the knowledge to be successful in their careers and in pursuing their dreams. So this is all great stuff. Ed, thank you so much for coming back on and just kind of updating all the information. This is all really, really great, really important. I know I keep saying that, but it's something I really feel passionate about. And yeah, this has been great.
Thank you very much. Anytime.
Well, before we let you go, where can we, if you didn't listen to the last episode, you know this already, but where can we find you? I was just talking to the audience, not you, Ed. Where can the audience find you and Aldgate Insurance to pursue these policies that we were just talking about?
So our main website is aldgateins.com, ALDGATEINS.com. But we have an Oklahoma-specific film website where there's a FAQ that talks about some of the stuff that we talked last time and some of the stuff that we've talked about here. It's got a way of 24/7 getting that quick general liability coverage, and that is Oklahoma-film.com. Oklahoma-film.com.
Awesome. That's Oklahoma-film.com. Well, fantastic, Ed. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Call us with questions. We're happy to quote this stuff for people. We really want this industry to take off here, and we're behind you guys, and we want to be as helpful as possible. Whether you use us or any other broker, just please make sure you're doing things the right way. Make us all proud. And be safe.
There you go. I love it. Well, and if you liked what you just heard and you'd like to hear more, be sure to check us out at okieshowshow.com. You can also visit us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you would like to get involved yourself, you can visit us at patreon.com/okieshowshow. We have all sorts of rewards and all sorts of different tiers. We love you guys. Take care of yourselves and stay safe out there. And we'll see you guys next week.
The Okie Show Show is a mostly harmless media podcast recorded at Tower Studios in Oklahoma City. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. If you're a business or industry professional that would like to advertise on the podcast, email info@okieshowshow.com. Rates starting as low as $25.